State of Nature welcomes you.
On today's episode, we will be talking about Swift and we will be interviewing Ian Hartrey,
aka Swift Guy. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, meow, meow.
Hello, Ian.
Hi, how you doing?
So Ian, what have you done to boost the local Swift population?
Well, it's difficult to put a number on it, but basically with swifts, it's just what I've noticed is that unfortunately they're a bird that's not doing particularly well. Unfortunately, we've lost so many of them, and if we're not careful, we're going to lose them as a breeding bird in Wales in a little over a decade, because every year there seems to be less and less of them. So it's a pretty shocking statistic, really. In the UK, they think as a whole, we've got a little over 50,000 birds. Now, when you hear that number, you think, oh, 50,000, that's quite a lot. But when you consider that the population where, the human population in this country is about 66, 67 million, 50,000 swifts isn't really a lot. And every year, unfortunately, it looks as if we're losing about 5% of their numbers. Now, if you think about Wales, obviously we live in Wales and we want to be able to see swifts. They reckon that swift numbers have fallen by about 72% from 1995 to 2018. So nearly 3/4 of their numbers have disappeared from 1995 to 2018. So that's a pretty scary statistic, really. And as I say, if we continue to lose them at the rate we're doing, then these amazing birds aren't going to be around and we're not going to be able to enjoy them. So in terms of what I've done to help the swift population is try and make a better noise. So I found out a little bit more about swifts a few years ago when I was volunteering with the RSPB. And there was a local bird club, Glamorgan Bird Club, who knew that swift numbers were falling and wanted to do something to help. So they got in touch with the RSPB, and together they worked on a project to see what they could do. And in a partnership with Cardiff Harbour Authority, they looked at the idea of putting up some kind of tower that would have swift boxes in there and provide places for swifts to nest. So that's something that, as a project, that they've been able to achieve. And I think it was May 2019 is when, if you go over Cardiff Barrage, there is a fantastic looking swift. It's like a Y shape, supposed to represent the shape of the swift's wings. And it's got room for, I think it's 70 boxes in total. Now, it's going to take a few years. There's a swift call system on the tower to attract it, because there is evidence that if you're able to play swift calls, then obviously they've got fantastic hearing as well as sight. And they'll be intrigued to hear, see where this sound is coming from, and they'll come and investigate. And hopefully they'll realize that this will be a great place for them to have, nest sites of their own. But they reckon it probably will take about 3 years before the first nests, before the first boxes will be used. So that's something to look out for, or watch out in the next couple of years to see if we are successful.
As just mentioned about the Swift Tower, why did you want to make it?
Well, it's like I was saying just a second ago, with the numbers falling as fast as they are, it's almost like, right, we've got to do something. This is a fantastic bird. I keep on saying it. It's because, do you guys know swifts? Have you seen them yourself?
Yeah. They're amazing birds.
Have you been up close to them?
Well, by the lake, they, as I know, they get water from skimming the lakes and stuff. I saw a bunch of them there.
Yeah. Well, for me, they're when you see a swift, it's like, wow, summer's arrived. They're, of all the migrant birds that come to us every year, they're around about the last ones to arrive, and they're the first ones to leave. So it's kind of like, great, they've arrived. And then when they leave, which is quite early in the summer, it's like late July, about the third week in July, they start heading back. And most of them, the first week of August, they're probably gone. You get a few stragglers coming through later, but it's almost like, oh, great, the summer's gone. The nights are drawing in. But before then, while they are here, they're just such amazing birds. Are they the fastest bird in the world? That's a question.
Well, they're certainly fast.
Yeah.
Does anybody know what the fastest bird in the world is?
Peregrine falcon?
Correct. So the peregrine is the fastest. But what does the peregrine do to get to that speed? It goes up high.
Yeah.
And dives bombs.
And basically, puts itself in an amazing streamlined position and just dives bomb like a rocket. Well, swifts are the fastest bird in level flight. So if they're just flying sideways, nothing can keep up with the speed of a swift. They're around about 70 miles an hour. So they're amazingly fast, amazingly agile. The way they move about, the reason I asked you if you've seen them up close is because when you do, it's something that you probably won't forget, because the sound of them, if you're able to go to a place where there's a decent swift nest community, then during the summer, you'll get these, what they call screaming parties of swifts. They're flying low down over the buildings. They're screaming as they fly, so it makes a great noise. It's like aerial display team, the way that they fly in sort of squadrons. It's almost as if they're just having a good laugh together, but they're obviously doing it for a purpose. They're probably looking out for new nest sites of their own. These could be youngsters which have they're not ready to have chicks of their own yet, but by next year or the year after that, they probably will be ready. And they're looking to find nest spaces of their own. It's worth saying that the reason why that's important is because, say you have a parent pair of swifts, you've got the male and the female swift, and every year they'll go back to their same nest position. So do you guys know where they nest at all? Do you know where they might nest?
Possibly like on like the edge of house roofs, is it?
Yeah.
Like in barns, maybe.
Yeah, we used to have one of those in that old house, but we realised that they used to come every year, and it was really, really good seeing them.
Yeah, that's what they do. They basically find a place, and it's usually like a little nook or cranny in a building, or a broken tile, or quite often if you see the old Victorian houses, they've got the gable ends, and there's usually a gap at the top. And this is the kind of places that they like. They don't take up too much space, but once they found the place, that's it. That's their place, and they're very site loyal. So the same birds, they come to us from Africa in the summer. First thing they'll do is check out their nest site, make sure it's okay, and they'll be using that nest site every year for as long as they're alive. They come back every year to the same place. So it's worth saying, this is one of the main reasons we think, or one of the big reasons at least, that their numbers are falling so much, is that where they nest is all these nooks and crannies. And what's happened over the last couple of decades in particular is that people are, understandably, people are wanting to make their insulation in their homes a bit better. They want to, cut down on their heating bills. They want to seal up all the nooks and crannies. But unfortunately, when they're putting a new roof on, quite often they probably didn't even know that they had a swift nest there. And it's a really sad story that the swifts come back and they found, oh, our nest has been blocked up. So suddenly they've flown these thousands of miles from Africa. They've successfully managed to get all the way back here, and they've been made homeless. And the problem with swifts is that they're quite slow to adapt and to find new places to nest. And although birds like swifts are, probably the best flying birds out there, they fly hundreds and hundreds of miles every day, and it's really effortless. You know, the way you see them flying, you could tell it's no effort at all for them. In fact, they do everything as they're flying. They obviously catch all their insects as they're flying. They even sleep while they're flying, which is, you know, pretty amazing, really. They, you know, even mate on the wing. So they even catch their nest material as they're flying. So they do everything whilst they're flying. But if they end up on the floor, they're pretty useless. They probably won't be able to take back off again. And there's some really sad stories of, you know, swifts that have returned back to the UK. They've gone to their nest hole. They've flown up to where their nest was, and they found that it's blocked. And they're thinking, oh my God, but they can't get it into their heads that the nest is not there anymore. And they keep on flying up, and it's sad, and then become so tired and so disoriented that they end up on the floor, where they are obviously vulnerable to cats, you know, anything that might find them. And like I said, if you see them on the floor, they probably won't be able to take back off again. So if you do see them on the floor, then that's a bird that probably needs rescuing. So you could try and put it to an elevated position. I've seen people do this, actually put it up. As long as they've got like a decent height, they can sort of fly back up again, you know. So they've got really short feet, which are not really good for perching on anything. Perfect for flying, but not for being on the ground. So I went off on a bit of a tangent then. I can't remember what the question was, but hopefully that was a good enough answer.
And going back to the point where it's really amazing to see these birds up close, have you got any tips on how to find these birds, or where to look?
So I think the best way of trying to find if you've got any swifts near you, so is to go back to what I said earlier. Think about where they would want to find their nests, and they typically like older buildings, ones typically that have been built before the Second World War. So you're looking around before 1939. It doesn't have to be, but quite often, if you go into cities and towns, and this is a great thing about swifts, you don't have to go off into the wilderness in the middle of the countryside, you know, miles from anywhere. They nest amongst us. They've got used to the idea that we provide good nesting opportunities for them, as long as we don't block up their holes, that is. So, you know, they're used to humans. You can probably get quite close to them. But a really good tip to try and find them is on a warm, still summer's evening, maybe an hour or two before dusk, is to, you know, go to these kind of places, old Victorian streets in Cardiff. And sometimes it's places like they're a little bit more, they're not quite so pristine, the buildings. So there are places for them to nest, all nooks and crannies. And you will see them this kind of time before dusk. They're flying up to their nest holes. They're making the screaming sound. You know, there could be youngsters amongst them who are, like I said earlier, they're prospecting for their nests of their own. So they may not be using them this year, but they're thinking ahead for next year, the year after. And they've even got these, they call them knockers. Some of the swifts actually they basically bang up to a nest hole and make a noise to see if anyone's in there. And if anyone's in there, they'll hear a swift angrily reply back, "Clear off, this is mine, find your own place." But if they don't, then they could have found themselves a new nest site. So on a still, warm summer's evening, you could walk the streets safely when we're allowed to and all the rest of it. And yeah, you should, if you're able to hear them, there's something else you could do and see them. You can record it on an app. There's a fantastic app called, I think it's called the Swift Mapper. So if you see parties of screaming swifts together and they're flying low over the building, you go onto the Swift Mapper app and you can record where you've seen them, and that's basically an indication that there are swift nest sites nearby. So if you see them flying up to the nest itself, even better, and you can record that as well. So literally, you can put in the postcode, the address, record where you've seen it. You know, is the nest safe? You know, for all you know, it is safe, but it might be it might be that they're going to be doing some building work. They could be putting a new roof on. It could be a school that's going to be putting. You know, you might know that there's going to be some building work going on, and you could alert the people then and say, oh, before you put the new roof on, there's actually a swift nest there. And the good thing is about that Swift mapper, not Apper, you can go on there and have a look to see if there are any swift nests in your area. So you can actually go and you can have a look all around the country to see where all the swift nest sites are. So it's a really good way of finding out where they are near to you.
What inspired you to fall in love with birds? Generally.
I think it's when I was probably just about your age. There's a place near Penarth where I'm from called Cosmoston, which used to be an old quarry, and then they turned it into a country park. And I just used to go out on my bike with my friends. We used to go down to Cosmoston, and there was a warden down there who basically taught us the names of dragonflies, birds, butterflies, flowers, and things. I'm just walking around with them, and it was great then because it was such a new park, and not many people were around. So it was basically our playground. We had it to ourselves. We could just go anywhere, have a good laugh, mess around, but also with somebody like that warden who was teaching us the things. Suddenly you look at the world in a different way. So I think he showed us what to look out for, and we would report back to the warden to say, oh, we saw one of these, we saw one of those, and it really got us interested into birds and in wildlife in general, really. So a couple of years ago now.
And how do you know so much about swifts in particular?
I think it was, like I said earlier, Joe, it was when I was doing some voluntary work with the RSPB, and the Glamorgan Bird Club were basically saying that we've got to do something to help these swifts because they're falling in number, and the idea that we could lose them as a bird in Wales. We've lost lots of birds in Wales already that have become extinct in my lifetime, and it's really sad. Things like nightingale, turtle doves. These are birds that we used to have here. Now, I've seen one nightingale in my life, and that wasn't in Wales. I've seen turtle dove, again, not in Wales. But can you imagine these amazing birds that we lose them? So it's when you hear about that, you think, right, well, what can we do to help them? So and then you learn a bit more about them, and all these things I was telling you earlier. They're the fastest birds in level flight. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they slept on the wing. Could you imagine being able to just you fly and then just you turn off half your brain and you just use your wings to support you, and the rest of you is just having a bit of a sleep there.
The thing is, wouldn't you just crash into something if you're not paying attention?
Well,
They're so high.
They're so high as well. They travel up really high, and I think it was in the 1950s because they didn't know that birds did this, but in the 1950s it was on some radar. They were picking up these tiny little objects on some radar screens. I think it was in America or somewhere, and they didn't know what they were. And then they realised that these swifts were going up to this sort of level, safe from crashing into buildings and all the rest of it. And then they were able to then just put themselves into this state where we still don't know all the facts about them, where they think they could turn half their brain off and just have enough of their brain working to realize which way the wind's blowing and how they need to adjust their wings to stay in a pretty safe position. So
I don't know. I don't know if swifts do this, but I know particular birds do this. It was on Winter Watch. I don't know if they do, but some birds they call it peeking. So to look for predators, or maybe when they're in the air, one of their eyes are open and the other one's closed. I don't know if they do that. Do they do that?
if I was a Swift, I'd keep my eyes open for things as well. So yeah, probably. I don't know if that's specifically what they do, but yeah, it would make sense. And I think, yeah, they are like other birds. They are vulnerable to being attacked, but the fact that they are so fast, if I was a peregrine or a sparrowhawk, I'd probably look for something that was a bit slower to go after, to be honest with you. It's probably easier.
Like you were talking about migrating, where particularly do they migrate to and from?
Well, this is another thing that we're learning about them now that we didn't know just a few years ago. As technology has improved, have you heard where they're able to put these little tiny tags onto birds, and they've got these tags called geolocators. So they're literally able to tell where the birds are at any one point, as they're flying. So as they've managed to tag a relatively small number of birds, but the data that's provided is amazing. It's, we've learning, where they're flying. So I mentioned earlier, they're usually on their way back to Africa, or way south from Britain around about the third week in July. So they're flying down through Spain, Western Africa. I think Western Africa is a really important area for them, particularly on the northerly migration. So if let's go south first. They go to Western Africa, and it doesn't take them long to travel fast distances. And then they spend a good part of the winter in the Dominican Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is like, it's a rainforest, and that's an amazingly important place for wildlife. I know that in the same tagging data they found on cuckoos is that they realized that cuckoos spend the bulk of their winter in the same area. But swifts are, because they're such amazing flyers, if they know, or if they find out of another food source, like a massive food source for them, they can move on and take advantage of that, whereas some other birds aren't quite as mobile. So birds have even been seen to really go to the southeast of Africa, Mozambique kind of area. And then, they slowly make their way back up. And they usually arrive in Britain. This is the other interesting thing about them. They arrive in Britain at the same time pretty much every year. So it doesn't matter, there's a lot of talk. I know you guys have been talking about climate change, and things, are changing as a result of that. Birds, are nesting earlier. But the things with long distance migrants like swifts is that they're not changing their migration times. They're still arriving back in the UK the same time every year. So you could almost put your watch by it that in Cardiff, the birds that probably nest in the streets around our houses in Cardiff, they probably arrive 1st, 2nd of May. You might get the odd birds before that, but our birds will probably be back on the 1st or 2nd of May, around about that time. So, it's amazing that they fly these huge distances, and yet they arrive almost the same time every year. I mentioned Western Africa. There's a place called Liberia, which we're learning that must be a really good source of food for them, because they spend quite a bit of time there feeding up before they then travel quite quickly from there back up to the UK in late April, early May.
This is not to do with Swift, but what is your favourite bird?
Are there other birds apart from swifts? Well, my favourite, I don't know. I would say swifts are probably my favourite, just for all the reasons I've said. But I think it changes all the time. To be honest with you, it's like the start of spring. You see your first migrating birds. Say there might be a wheatear, and wheatears are quite often one of the first migrants we see in the UK. And you think, great, spring's on the way. The cold winter months are hopefully behind us now, and now it's going to get warmer, brighter. So when I see the first wheatear, I think, yeah, fantastic. And then I see the first swallow and sand martin, And then eventually when the swifts arrive, you know, so, right, summer's arrived now. And then you hear the calls and you think, wow, yeah, here we are. This is summer. Fantastic.
And I know you've mentioned about some of the things that swifts eat, but what's their main diet like?
Anything that flies, really, or small flies, little spiders and things. So anything airborne, small like that. If you would ever get to see photos of them up close, because when you're looking at them in real time, they're just so fast, they're gone in the blink of an eye, so you can't really see them. But there are some great photographers out there who are able to capture, you know, what they look like, and they fly with their mouths open. You know, they're literally trying to hoover up the flies as they're going, and they've got this pouch here where they store all the flies and the insects that they've caught, and they use that as basically a pouch, and eventually they'll feed their chicks with it. But you can see them sometimes, and they've got like a swollen. You can see that it's full of this like all like mushed up kind of fantastic insects ready to feed their young, all the protein and healthy stuff that they need to grow. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So for our last question, where is your favourite place to go birding?
I think for me personally, somewhere quiet. I think it's great that you know, with COVID and you know, all the things we've been through in the past year, I think people have realised the importance of having accessible places to go to appreciate nature. You know, at the start of lockdown last year, people were able to hear the birds. For the, you know, some people it sounded like they'd never noticed the birds singing before, and suddenly, with the traffic noise was less, they were able to hear them. So for me, if I'm out birding, I want to go somewhere that's quiet. I'm not gonna want too much disturbance if I can, because you know, you're out sometimes, you're seeing a good bird, and you're waiting for it to show itself for you. You've got your binoculars, and suddenly there's a dog walker and it's gone, it's flown off, and you think, oh, you know, and it can be a bit frustrating. But at the same time, like I said, people need to have the outdoor spaces to enjoy going to. So I think another place that's important for me is still Cosmiston. That's a great place. I think somewhere where you've got a variety of different habitats. So you've got the water, you've got the woodland, you've got the reed beds. So if you go somewhere like that, then you're going to see, if you wanted to get a large number of birds in one day, you're able to see lots of different types of birds if you go to somewhere like that.
Very interesting.
If you've got any questions, as you can tell, I can rattle off about swifts all day long. So if you think of anything after we finish today, just drop me an email or let me know, and I'll be able to answer your questions. But there's some important stuff of what you can do, boys. If I can put it around, you've asked me lots of questions, but if I can pull it back to you now, you are so much more important and will be able to influence things better than I can. So I think one of the early questions you asked me was, what have you done to help the bird population? Well, what I've done is basically tried to be a little bit of a nuisance. I mentioned earlier that where they like to nest is in the little nooks and crannies. Now, new buildings are going up all over the place, and modern building techniques will not have any spaces for birds to nest. They won't have any gaps or any places like that. So if you know of a new school that's having a new building or a new housing development that's going up in your area, what I would suggest that people do is try and find out who the developers are, who the builders are, and then approach these people and introduce yourself, say who you are and what you're doing, and you say, I would like you to make sure that you've got spaces for swifts to nest in your buildings. And I've done that a few times, and I've been successful in certain places. Other places, it hasn't worked. But if you don't ask, I can assure you it's not going to happen. And what we would like to happen, people like me and people who care about swifts and other birds, is that we would like the government and the regulations to change so that if there is going to be a new housing development that's got 500 new houses going up, we would like the authorities to say, look, you need to put places for birds to nest in your buildings as standard. It needs to happen every time. And the builders, I'm sure, will quickly realise it's not expensive for them to do, because you can put in, have you heard of swift bricks?
Yeah.
Swift bricks, provide a perfect nesting place for swifts. Not just swifts, other birds can use them as well. So you can have sparrows using them. Another bird which isn't, doing as well as it used to do years and years ago, we've lost lots of sparrow numbers as well. Blue tits, grey tits can use them. Starlings, depending on the size of the box, of the hole, starlings can use them as well. So the good thing about a swift box is, swift brick, sorry, it doesn't affect the building. It's not going to need any maintenance. No one's going to have to go up every year to clean it out. It's going to provide a safe place for the bird, and the birds will eventually adapt. So what? There's a building near me in Penarth, which it only just finished last year, and there was a good nesting community of sparrows there, but there was also a swift nest I knew about. So when the developers did that, I contacted them, and they were happy, and I think they put in about 10 swift boxes in the end. And in the first year, I think 3 of the boxes were taken up by sparrows. So straight away, the sparrows have used those boxes. So the good thing is, what swifts do, like I remember I was saying earlier on, that they're a little bit slower than the other birds to adapt. But when they see the sparrows using the boxes, they'll think, oh yeah, that's quite a good idea. So, and because they arrive later, the sparrows may have finished breeding for that particular year, and then the swifts can move in afterwards. So if you can imagine, every new development has got places for swifts, then that problem that we talked about earlier, with all their homes being blocked up, they're going to have these opportunities for them to have places to live. So I assure you, if you were to contact them, they'd listen to you more than they would someone of my age. They'll think, oh my God, these kids are on my case. What am I going to do? And you will make a bigger impact than I ever could. I assure you that.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, very wise words.
You're a very wise man.
Very wise, yeah. That's all the questions that we've got.
Okay, well, like I say, if you think of anything, just let me know. I'll try and help you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for agreeing to talk with us today, and we'll try and get in contact with some
builders, developers, housing associations.
Yeah, and ask them to install swift bricks.
Yeah, and boxes.
Yeah.
And you could also speak to your teachers, your assembly members, your MPs. There's even there's this great initiative, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, called Species Champions. So there's loads of different species, of whether it's birds, reptiles, butterflies, all different animals. And some wildlife charities thought it would be a good idea to contact assembly members and members of parliament and saying, will you become a swift champion for the barn owl, the water vole, all these different species? And then it almost becomes personal then, doesn't it? It's almost like if you've got an assembly member that is responsible for swifts, they might think, oh yeah, I need to be able to help these. How can I help them? So if you know who the species champion is for a particular bird, whether it's a curlew or a swift or a hedgehog, you could contact them and saying, what are you doing for swifts? I know you're a species champion. What are you doing to help them? And like I said, it's easy for them to ignore grown-ups, but it's harder for them to ignore people like you. I'm sure you're very persuasive when you want to be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to State of Nature podcast, and thank you, Ian, for letting us interview you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Remember to check out Instagram, the State of Nature podcast.
And as usual, have to remember everything you can listen on. So you can listen on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and also you can watch on YouTube at State of Nature podcast. So yeah, as Joe said, thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Boom.